Hello and welcome to a new Osmium Update episode. Today I'm joined by Patrick Smith, VP and CTO EMEA at Pure Storage. Hey Patrick, it's great to have you.
Max, great to see you as always.
Fantastic. So Patrick, Everpure has some pretty exciting news in the space of cyber resiliency. Am I saying it correctly, by the way? Is it cyber resiliency or cyber resilience based on whether we are in the UK or...
I use them interchangeably.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's a transatlantic thing or a European thing, but interchangeable.
Excellent. Very good. So, Patrick, please tell us more. I've been briefed by your colleagues, and that sounds pretty exciting. So, I'll leave the floor to you.
I think it's interesting because we're not making a new product announcement. What we're seeing is a heightened awareness of the importance of cyber resilience. And I think if you roll back a year, you wouldn't think that cyber resilience could get more important. But with the all of the publicity around Anthropic's Mythos, people are looking again at their cyber resilience strategy. They're looking at the implications of AI-powered vulnerability detection and working out what they need to change to keep pace. Because I think organizations have always looked at cyber resilience and viewed it as important. Now we're really seeing a game changer potentially with the narrowing window between vulnerability identified and vulnerability fixed or patched or remediated.
So that's really interesting that you touched upon the AI topic because obviously, Mythos and what the big ones like Anthropic, OpenAI are announcing and, this kind of never-ending race. I'm a bit of a skeptical guy on AI personally, so I'll take some of the claims there with a grain of salt, but it's true that we've seen across a lot of companies making announcement that they found, vulnerabilities that have been lurking out there for years and so on. But what I think, what struck me in the presentation that your colleagues gave was the impact of the so-called agentic AI, right? I mean, that's really interesting because we've seen, many things online, such as the what happened, accidental deletions and stuff like that. And it seems that to enable agentic AI, you need to give a lot of permissions to the environment, and it thinks pretty much does what it wants, kind of tends to ignore, instructions, and seems to be a fantastic, recipe for catastrophe at scale somehow. So how do you approach that?
And I know exactly what you mean, Max, in terms of the reports we've seen about the implications of OpenClaw. And what OpenClaw can do if you give it unconstrained access to things like your inbox. But I think what we're looking at is two really interesting ways in which AI can help organizations and also where you need to protect. So firstly, we view AI as really helping organizations understand their environment and protect their environment. Conversely, we think that we need to have a human in the loop if you're doing so. As you look at protecting your environment, how do you protect your environment with AI-enabled capabilities to make sure you have consistency across the environment, to make sure you're always protecting your data in the way you expect and need to. But equally, if you're taking steps to modify or delete data, you need a human in the loop. And so it's a really good example in how we're doing that with some of our technology that provides a data set of last resort. So we have controls in place that mean that you have to have a human in the loop to authenticate to administrators before you can perform a delete action on your snapshots to make sure that it's fully authorized. And so we think it's really important to understand where you can have AI autonomously providing value, but also where you have to have human in the loop to protect against uncontrolled actions that may jeopardize your recoverability of the environment.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And one of the things that I really appreciated in what you've been doing before in terms of, the providing kind of, say, dual control or four eyes control mechanisms back in the day, when you were making sensitive operations to snapshots and retention policies. So it's really great to see that the human part is not left aside, especially because our perception at Osmium is that AI can do a lot of good things, but sometimes, or rather oftentimes, it misses the overall context, right? So it's not really aware about what kind of data you have, what is the criticality of the data. So if you provide, some instructions, it will go and run and execute without really understanding what is expected, right? So that is really cool. Are you also introducing something specific? Because you said it's not a product that you're introducing, but it's more kind of enhancing or adding more of a framework around your products and what you're doing together. So is there something that is changing more, let's say, on the cyber resiliency side? And I'm not maybe hopefully putting the cart ahead of the horse.
And really, it's about raising awareness. And so for many years, we saw a scenario where where organizations weren't embracing the concept of snapshots being the backstop for data, your data set of last resort. Organizations weren't embracing that. We've seen that changing now, where organizations, almost the majority of our customers, are now using our snapshots. And that's a great change, because we've now transitioned from, unfortunately, some customers who came to us and turned snapshots on when they realized that they had a problem in their environment. They got hit with an attack, and then they come to us and enable snapshots after the event. We want them to be much more proactive and do it before the event. And so organizations are now embracing that. More and more of our customers now are also embracing our safe mode capability, the fact that we make those snapshots not just immutable. All snapshots are immutable. You can't change the content, but also really importantly, indelible, in that you can't delete them. You can't modify the retention period. And so that becomes really important. And so what we're doing is, really, these announcements are to reinforce the fact that organizations need to be able to protect their environment, and it's becoming more and more critical to their operations with what's going on with AI-enabled vulnerability identification and potentially AI-enabled vulnerability attacks.
Yeah. So I think that it's a really important point there is people sometimes are not really aware that a certain technology exists and can help them. So what you've done with SafeMode is really interesting there. And I think that we've already discussed, maybe you can get back on that. It's what are you doing so that when a customer installs a new system, FlashArray, FlashBlade, whatever, that you help them get started and and be secure from day one, right? I mean, you do have the security assessments, you have safe mode enabled by default, if I'm not mistaken. So if you can just get back to that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So we took a step, as you mentioned, to enable safe mode by default. It makes, rather than people wondering, shall I enable safe mode or not? It's a much more difficult thing to say, I'm actively not going to enable it, or I'm going to turn it off. It's much more difficult to say, I'm going to turn it off. And so that's been a really good step. The other really interesting step that we've brought is, with the technology we introduced, Fusion, for fleet-wide management of multiple storage arrays across an organization, we've introduced this set of presets. And presets get really interesting in this regard because you can have a preset for your standard deployment and configuration for VMware environments, for Nutanix environments, for Microsoft SQL environments, for Oracle environments. And as part of that preset, you define what your replication requirements are, your disaster recovery requirements, but you also define what your snapshot requirements are, your retention period, your frequency of snapshots, the fact you've got safe mode turned on. And so it removes the opportunity for error. And that's absolutely key in these environments. You don't want somebody making a mistake that then can then go unnoticed that compromises your environment.
Yeah. So these are no foundational capabilities baked into the products, the solutions that you're delivering. But when we want to get back to cyber resiliency, and you talked about this last line of defense, so you do have these immutable snapshot, indelible snapshots, but how do we go further? I mean, is there a kind of, and I believe you might have something over there, but is there kind of an architecture that we can implement, to make sure that we are really 100% on the safe side, for example, having kind of a isolated, clean room recovery environment or something of that kind?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really interesting point. We're seeing more and more organizations looking at this concept of isolated recovery environments. And that is a layer on top of everything else that they may have for their standard disaster recovery, business continuity. And so that's becoming a growing trend. How do I have that almost a data bunker with no compute in it, so that data set, there's no point of compromise to get to that data set? And that's absolutely a growing area of interest in our customers, and we're seeing them actively deploying that.
Right. So if a customer wants to build such a solution, based on Everpure technology, where do they get started? Is there a kind of consultancy service that you provide to them, or how to get the ball rolling with you?
Yeah. So the customers can just engage with their Everpure teams, and we can get the right people engaged on that to help them on that journey and to build out those environments.
Right. So I was also looking at one thing is that you do have, of course, your built-in capabilities, your professional services team. From a broader ecosystem perspective, are you kind of, engaging with some, other vendors in the data protection space?
Yes. So, and it's interesting, as much as we talk about the importance of snapshots, of safe mode, we also have very important relationships with the data protection or cyber resilience vendors. And so the likes of Commvault, the likes of Rubrik, the likes of Veeam, and they help in terms of managing those snapshots at a higher level. So you can manage not just your backups, but also your snapshots. So you understand all of your recovery points across your environment through those technologies. But it's not just about those partners, it's also the intelligence that you can get from the storage layer of what's going on in your environment. And so how do you feed signals and telemetry from the storage layer into the likes of a CrowdStrike, into the likes of Splunk and Elastic for SIEM and SOAR environments? And so that's becoming really important as well, because it's not just the changing data patterns, it's also things like unusual login behaviors, failed logins, that kind of activity that we need to be able to identify and report on.
Yeah. And you kind of anticipated where I was going, because, in the end, when we talk about data protection and, these kind of isolated, cyber recovery vaults, this is really ultimate kind of last line of defense in the end, right? You go there when you're absolutely desperate, and being able to detect proactively what's going on in the environment at the storage layer and prevent, mitigate before going to, recover from a backup, or even worse, start from the ground with a clean room is really important. So thank you for touching on that point. I was thinking in terms of your customers, once again, when they get your product, your solution, and they start implementing, they get all of the features out of the box, and then they have to start thinking about these integrations. Is there anything that you have there which is kind of already prepared for them, kind of templatized, to help them detect all of that? Or is that something that they have to kind of figure out on their own? We're talking about Splunk integration or CrowdStrike and so on.
Yeah, in terms of those are integrations that we have documented, effectively reference
Okay.
designs for those, so their organizations don't need to start from the ground up. And it's all about making it as easy as possible to integrate into these environments. But it is the broad ecosystem that you need to protect at every level. But one of the things that we're really looking at the moment is, in the current climate, assume that the perimeter and all of those layered controls have failed. And how do you protect the data? How do you make sure that that data is recoverable as quickly as possible, so that you can minimize the mean time to restore or mean time to clean restore of that data set?
So that brings me to my last question, because as you say, the data is the most crucial point. It's where our business intelligence kind of resides, and so on. So and because Everpure is really focused on data management, and this more data-centric approach compared to the previous name of Pure Storage, right? I would say, is there anything that you are doing to kind of help in that perspective of protecting the data and so on, to kind of help classify, identify the data, kind of help organizations better understand their data sets, categorize, so they can act? Because if you're building, for example, a cyber recovery vault or a cyber recovery environment, you're probably not going to protect every single bit of data you have in the environment, or every single byte, because that costs money, right? So you're going to focus on crown jewels. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a great leading question, Max. So obviously, we changed the name from Pure Storage to Everpure. One of the things that happened that led us to make that change is moving up from just doing storage to doing data management. That journey is helped by the fact that we acquired OneTouch a couple of weeks ago. And OneTouch is a really interesting technology. It discovers a customer's data and identifies and understands that data, understands the context, provides semantic search, provides knowledge graphs of that data to allow organizations to say, okay, where is my critical data? Where have I got personally identifiable information? And to your point, how do I prioritize how I protect it? Obviously, early days, we only closed that deal to acquire OneTouch fairly recently. We have our Accelerate event in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks, and there'll be a lot more about OneTouch and our plans for OneTouch that come out of that conference. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I think it makes a good, kind of closing note or closing remark for that. With Ariane Timmerman, my business partner, who isn't on this call unfortunately today, we've always been kind of probing and poking a bit at, Pure Storage and now Everpure leadership, asking about, when are you guys going to build a data management solution or acquire a data management company? Because really, for us at Osmium, this was the last piece that was kind of missing, because the overall, strategy and all kind of all made sense in how you do things. And that is just the last kind of element that ties everything together and brings you, closer to the data. So this is really an exciting time, I guess, for Everpure. And I think, as you said, this is really recent. Accelerate is just around the corner, and it typically takes, a good half a year, 6, 9 months to start seeing the integrations and stuff flow, the IP flow into the product. So this promises for a very interesting set of announcements in the beginning of 2027, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very exciting time as the company evolves and, as you say, moves up from providing the storage layer to then providing data set management, and onwards to data management, true data management.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one closing note as well, because that's something that we had been, discussing with industry friends, even with Chris Mellor of the Register. We got to a point, I think probably still a year ago, where storage was boring, right? Storage was, everybody has storage, everybody has a resilient, or rather, let's say, a robust architecture, which prevents you against the most basic failure. Everybody has data services and so on. And, Flash is a commodity, it's cheap, everybody has it, right? And now, 6 months, 9 months down the line, Flash is expensive as ever, everything. So the thing I want to say there, maybe as a closing remark, is that storage matters, architecture matters, efficiency matters, right? So it's important to have those data services on top, to be able to address the business challenge, the resiliency, and so on. But you probably agree with me that, having the right architecture at the bottom, the foundation, is a key differentiator still today.
Yeah, absolutely. As much as some vendors talk about storage as being a commodity, we've always viewed storage as being high technology. It's evidenced by the amount we invest in R&D into our platforms, and I think in the current climate, it's never been more important to make sure that you have the concepts of reliability, efficiency, the evergreen capabilities to keep platforms modern without replacing the whole technology stack. They're becoming more important than ever. So I think it's reinforcing the decisions we've made.
Amazing. So Patrick, thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure having you here, and I hope we will be discussing very soon again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Max.